Dear learners, in our previous class, we discussed about the terrorism and human rights. We found that what kind of definitional dilemma is there. It becomes very difficult to define terrorism. We discussed that what are the common elements in the definition of terrorism, and we found that the most important thing is that the politically motivated violence is terrorism, and that's why we can differentiate terrorism from other kind of criminal activity, because in other criminal activities you will not find what is called the political motive. uh, that was one thing, and secondly we discussed also about the causes of terrorism, and we identified certain important causes of terrorism, the root causes of terrorism. And we found that inequality, for example, globalization, for example, inequality was the first point that we discussed, that uh, terrorism, inequality of status, whether it is economic equality, social equality, or political inequality, all these are responsible or important factors for what we call uh, contributing to terrorism. Then we discussed about ideological and religious fundamentalism and extremism, and we found that from extreme left to extreme right, you will find different kind of violent ideologies are there, and these ideologies have been responsible for motivating people, indoctrinating people for waging war, what they consider as the just war. Then the sense of injustice prevailing in a section or sections of people. It is also one of the most important causes responsible for terrorism, insurgency, or militancy anywhere in the world. Uh, so, if a section of people or sections of people believe in a particular territory, that is national, nation state, so they may, wage war against the state. Similarly, alienation, if the people are feeling alienated from the state and they think that the state is not responsive uh, to their problem, then also that is also a major cause of uh, violence and terrorism. Gross violation of human rights, and we found that human rights, if the human rights are granted, if the human rights are protected, and if the people are satisfied that their rights, dignity is being protected, then there are very uh, there are this is the likelihood that they are not going to wage war against the state. The satisfaction level should be higher so far as the human rights index is concerned. Socioeconomic factors, of course, deprivation, displacement, marginalization, social exclusion, all these are responsible for terrorism. Then lack of a space for political dissent. So we discussed that why democracies are better than other forms of government, because the peaceful transfer of power is there. Again, in democracies, we find that not only peaceful transfer of power, but there is a space for political dissent. So if the a space for political dissent where the people have right to criticize their government or to disagree with their rulers, so there also it is likely that terrorism will not crop up, or it will not become a fertile breeding ground for terrorism. Then globalization, these days you will find there is a lot of debate on pros and cons of globalization. That it is being said that globalization, on the one hand, is creating a lot of wealth, but at the same time, it is creating mass poverty. So, that is also becoming anti-globalization movement sometimes become violent, and the people feel that, outsiders, especially, for example, native violence against the outsider, racism, xenophobia, all these kind of things you will find because of this globalization. Then demand for cessationist movements are the major cause of terrorism anywhere in the world. All these things we have discussed. Now we are coming to terrorism and human rights, and here we are going to explain that how terrorism threatens human rights. So a study by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights recognizes that terrorism poses grave threat to human rights. That is the realization. The study was conducted. You will find the fact sheet is there. In the fact sheet, it has been mentioned that terrorism is a major threat to human rights, and it observes, in the study it has been observed that terrorism clearly has a very real and direct impact on human rights. you know so that is one point that should be kept in mind, that uh, terrorism clearly has a very real and direct impact on human rights, with devastating consequences for the enjoyment of right to life, liberty, and physical integrity of victims. So, what are the rights that are being identified? The most important, how terrorism is threatening the human rights of the people, and that is rights to life, liberty, and physical integrity of victims. In addition to these individual costs, terrorism can destabilize governments, undermine civil society, jeopardize peace and security, and threaten social and economic developments. So we should remember that terrorism has different kind of degree, what kind of intensity is there, how many people are indulged, where there is a foreign support or not. All these things, if you take into account, then how the it is being countered, what kind of counter-terrorism measures are being taken. All these things, keeping in view, you'll find that in addition to these individual costs, terrorism can destabilize governments. It is such a powerful tool, violent tool, that it can destabilize legitimate governments, undermine civil society, and jeopardize peace and security, and threaten social and economic developments. So peace and prosperity go together. So that's why, if the businessmen, other economic establishment, if they are targeted, what will happen, that peace will not be there, and when the peace is not there, and the people are feeling threatened in those areas. So there are many challenges. For example, it becomes very difficult to invest in the areas which are affected by terrorism, because the terrorists have their own network, and they try to dictate terms to the people, those who are there in those areas, those who are indulged in the economic activities. The states of the United Nations have recognized the relation between terrorism and violation of human rights, and have set out that terrorism, what they have realized, the member states, means all the member states of the United Nations, they have unanimously agreed upon one thing, that there is a relation between terrorism and violation of human rights. So whenever there is terrorism, there will be violation of human rights. Most basic human rights will be violated. And what are the threats that they have identified? How it violates human rights. According to them, terrorism, the member states, they have agreed through the United Nations, of course, that terrorism threatens the dignity and security of human beings everywhere, endangers or takes innocent lives. There is no doubt. So terrorism, it takes security of human beings everywhere. It threatens dignity and security. Then endangers or takes innocent lives. Most of the time, you'll find that terrorist target are innocent people, those who have nothing to do with the policies of the government, those who have nothing to do with the act of the government. Most of the time, innocent children, women, old men, people traveling in the trains, buses, aeroplane, they are targeted. So that is, it endangers or takes innocent lives, creates an environment that destroys the freedom from fear of the people, jeopardizes fundamental freedoms, and aim at the destruction of human rights. So, it creates fear. The main purpose of a terrorist act is to create fear, to create, shiver in the mind of the people. So, because of that, what happens, that people cannot live in a free atmosphere where they are not feeling any kind of threat. But, the threat of violence is always looming large. Even if there is no terrorist attack, but the area is known to be prone to the terrorist attacks, then an uneasy calm prevails all the time, and the people living over there, they always fear that anytime anything may happen. So under that kind of circumstances, you can see that the realization of human rights, enjoyment of human rights, enjoyment of freedom, liberty, that becomes a challenge. Then terrorism has an adverse effect on the establishment of the rule of law. Of course, rule of law will be undermined, because they don't care for the law. Undermines pluralistic civil society. So you'll find terrorist groups, when they are operating, they can destabilize the society by creating fissure, by creating cracks, by creating division in the society. And by creating division, they get advantage out of it. So that can be done. uh, Aims at destruction of the democratic basis of society. When we say democratic basis, what is democratic basis? Tolerance, for example. Voices of dissent should be heard. People should freely express their opinion. They are free to have any kind of thought, or opinion, and they have freedom to express it. All these bases of democracy, they are threatened, and destabilizes legitimately constituted governments. So, that impact, that it destabilizes legitimately constituted governments. Terrorism has links with transnational organized crime. This is also an important dimension of terrorism. So, terrorism has links with transnational organized crime like drug trafficking, money laundering, and trafficking in arms, as well as illegal transfer of nuclear, chemical, and biological materials, and is linked to the consequent commission of serious crimes such as murder, extortion, kidnapping, assault, hostage taking, and robbery. These are the manifestations of terrorism. So you'll find most of the time the security agencies have identified the terrorist groups having nexus with the groups that are operating through drug trafficking, money laundering, or trafficking in arms, because they need arms, they need money. So that is why for all these they are indulged in this kind of organized crime, that is transnational organized crime like drug trafficking, money laundering, and trafficking in arms, as well as illegal transfer of nuclear, chemical, and biological materials. This has been also reported. So, suppose if nuclear weapons, for example, or chemical and biological weapons are falling in the hands of the terrorist, what will happen then? So, the danger of nuclear terrorism, the danger of chemical terrorism, the danger of biological terrorism, that is also there. And that's why the groups that are opposing nuclear weapons or biological and chemical weapons, they say that what may happen, that if they are not transferring, if the terrorists are transferring nuclear, chemical, and biological materials, for example uranium, thorium, etc., and other things, they can also try to acquire the bombs and the chemical and biological weapons that are already there with the states. And if these bombs and weapons are falling in the hands of them, then what will happen to the international peace and security, or to the life and dignity of the individuals everywhere in the world? So, and terrorism is also linked to the consequent commission of serious crimes such as murder, extortion, kidnapping, assault, hostage taking, and robbery. All these are part of terrorism. It also identified that it has adverse consequences for the economic and social development of states, jeopardizes friendly relations among its states, and has a pernicious impact on relations of cooperation among states, including cooperation for development. So, terrorism is such a strong weapon that it can uh, also jeopardize the relations between the two countries or many other countries. Because, for example, if terrorists are operating from one country, maybe they are operating clandestinely. The government is not favoring them, not supporting them. But since the terrorist organizations are there, and if they are operating from a particular country, and if they are striking another country, the international terrorism is also a fact that we should remember. So what will happen, that the country which is facing the danger of attack, or the country which has been attacked, it will be targeting the country from where the terrorists tried to strike. So under these kind of circumstances, what will happen, that the bilateral relations between the countries that can be affected. So that way terrorism in this way is very dangerous. It also affects what is called the economic and social development of states. Of course, because a lot of money you have to spend on the counter terrorism operations. At the same time, because of this, there will not be place for industry and other things when the area is affected by terrorism, because they will go for extortion and all. So that is also another problem. Then has a pernicious impact on relations of cooperation among states, including cooperation for development. So when the bilateral relations or the multilateral relations of the state, if that is affected, then what will happen, that they cannot cooperate with each other for development and progress. They also identified that terrorism threatens the territorial integrity and security of states, constitutes a grave violation of the purpose and principle of the United Nations, is a threat to international peace and security, and must be suppressed as an essential element for the maintenance of international peace and security. It has been again accepted, or it has been realized collectively by all the member states of the United Nations that it threatens the territorial integrity and security of the states. So you'll find secessionist movement, for example, they are demanding cessation from one particular country, and then they are taking arms in their hands. And so if they are successful, or if they are threatening itself, so the territorial integrity of the and security of the state is always in danger, constitutes a grave violation of the purpose and principles of the United Nations, because United Nations always promotes what is called peaceful settlement of disputes. It promotes human rights, and also the purpose and principles of the United Nations, they are also threatened. Is a threat to international peace and security. There is no doubt in it. We saw that the global terrorism, for example, what happened when WTC was attacked on 9/11, or 7/7 bombing, or the Bombay bomb blast. There were many terrorist incidents. So you can find that this happened. And if you see the global terrorism index, you will find 10, 20 countries who are affected by terrorism. What is the rate of casualties over there? What kind of threat they are facing? All these things you can identify. Terrorism also threatens the most basic human right, that is right to life. That is the problem, that terrorism is threatening the most basic life, that is right to life, because they are targeting innocent individuals, killing them, indulging the bloodshed. So that is why they threaten, terrorists threaten the most basic human right, that is the right to life. Again, terrorism creates a climate of perpetual fear, and personal liberty gets lethal blow. So, a country, or an area, or a region affected by terrorism, people, those who are living over there, they are living in constant fear. So when they are living in constant fear, personal liberty gets lethal blow. There is no doubt in it. Again, terrorism does not differentiate between combatants and non-combatants. And in most cases, the innocent people become the victims of terrorism. Again, innocent people are targeted. So in most of the cases, they are, since soft target, so that happens that they are the innocent people most of the time, who have nothing to do with the policies and programs of the government. They are killed, or they are facing all these kind of problems. Terrorism also creates enmity between communities. Terrorism, it can create enmity between communities. We can understand that, for example, these days you'll find a lot of discussion is there about different kind of terrorism. The religious terrorism, for example. So if the religious terrorism, where the religion becomes the motivating force, and if that is creating the terrorist organizations, and these are terrorist organizations are indulge in the terrorist activities, then what will happen, that it will create enmity between the communities. After the WTC attack on the United States of America in 2001, you'll find that many people, diaspora, especially people from outside, people of Arab origin, or people who are identified as Muslims, they also face backlash. But of course, credit should be given to America, or the United States of America, for controlling the situation in such a way that it did not go out of hand. But however, you see that there were Islamophobia, that was the phenomenon after 9/11, that was very common. So ultimately, under these kind of circumstances, you can see that it creates enmity between communities. Again, it provokes government to retaliate with disproportionately excessive use of force. Terrorism, this is the uh, problem. For example, what happens if the government is not doing, if there is terrorist attack, if the government is not doing, then the public opinion will be against the government. So ultimately, government has to retaliate. Government has to, see that who are the culprits, and the perpetrators are to be brought to book. But most of the time, what happens, that the terrorists don't, they are not in the battlefield. They go, they strike, and after that, they submerge in the vast sea of masses. So that is why it becomes very difficult to identify them. So, because of this, what happened? It provokes government to retaliate with disproportionately excessive use of force. Sometimes, the government
when it is going for retaliation or for apprehending the terrorists, innocent people are also targeted. So when the innocent people are targeted, it creates problem. And remember, this strategy of terrorism was carefully planned and discussed by Brazilian terrorist Carlos Margila in his manual of the urban gorilla. That government is to be trapped. Government is to be trapped in such a way that the terrorist organization, they try to provoke the government to retaliate with excessive force, and that is a trap. In most of the time you'll find governments are uh, there in that particular trap. So that's why this Carlos Marigela, in his mini manual for of the urban gorilla rights, he explained that besides undermining public confidence in government, terrorism forces government into a reactive posture, and as repression increases, the government angers its own citizens. That is a strategy deliberately adopted by the terrorist organizations. So that is why you can understand how serious the threat is.
Now, counterterrorism and human rights. Uh, if terrorism is there, then it is to be countered. So the counter-terrorism strategies are to be adopted. Here, what happens? The first strategy will be legislative measures. You have to make a stringent law in a particular country which is affected by terrorism, so that perpetrators of violence or perpetrators are not going uh, scot free, so they should be punished. So here what happens, that preventive detention laws and laws to punish the perpetrators are often misused by state agencies, leading to colossal violation of human rights. This is the fact that most of the time security agencies have been found to misuse the preventive detention laws or the stringent laws that are made by the government to punish the perpetrators. And in many cases, or in some cases, what happens that the those who are not perpetrators, they also face the wrath of the security agencies. Sometimes they are killed, people, innocent people. Sometimes they are detained or merely on the ground of suspicion, and after that you'll find judiciary finds that these people were innocent. But by that way you can understand that the legislative measures which is giving blanket power to security agencies through this kind of laws, that also create problem for human rights. So ultimately, not only terrorism but counter terrorism is also responsible for violation of human rights. In many instances, innocent people are sandwiched between the terrorist and the security agencies. Again, if a terrorist affected area is there, a disturbed area is there, what happens that the people, general masses or innocent people, those who have nothing to do either with the policies of the government or with the, the objectives and the methods of operation of the terrorist, they have nothing to do with this. Innocent people trying to live in peace and harmony with others, these people are also targeted, and they are sandwiched between the security agencies and the terrorist organizations. Terrorist organizations or the terrorists, they will apprehend them, or they will inflict injury to these innocent people, because if they are not cooperating, or if they suspect that they are the informers of the security agencies. Sometimes security agencies think that these are the people who are giving shelter to the terrorist, they are having soft corner for the terrorist. So ultimately in this kind of cases, you'll find innocent people are sandwiched between the terrorist and the security agencies. The Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights also observed that the counter-terrorism measures adopted by states too often pose serious threat to human rights and the rule of law. War on terror and violation of human rights. As you all know that when the World Trade Center and the Pentagon was attacked by the terrorists on September 11, 2001, then the United States of America declared war on terror. And the unilateralism of the United States of America in its foreign policy was reflected. The President of the United States of America, George W. Bush, also warned people and the countries of the world that this is the time to decide whether you are with us or against us. So, this was a threat that if you are not supporting the war on terror of the United States of America, it means the people, those who are not supporting, if they are remaining neutral, they are with the terrorist.
This kind of rhetoric you'll find. So, war on terror that was declared after 9/11 attack on the United States of America, that also led to violations of human rights. The Amnesty International, perhaps the largest network of human rights activists and scholars, besides condemning the acts of terrorism in recent years, has pointed out about the current unending war on terror. And what is the its you see observation? The war on terror has led to an erosion of a whole host of human rights. States are resorting to practices which have long been prohibited by international law and have sought to justify these practices in the name of national security and counterterrorism. You see, Amnesty International also emphasized that the real security against terrorism can only be achieved through a strengthening human rights framework and not through undermining it by resorting to unlawful practices. The study by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has discussed the specific human rights, you know, which are violated, challenges in the context of terrorism and counterterrorism. And the study identifies the following human rights that are threatened by terrorism and counterterrorism. Number one, the right to life. The international and regional human rights law recognizes the right and duty of states to provide security of life to individuals under their jurisdiction. However, the states, in many cases, Amnesty International is pointing out, this organization, this UN Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is pointing out that how it is threatening right to life. So I think the time is over for today's lecture. We will take up this point, that is, what kind of threat it is posing to human rights. We will take up this aspect of terrorism and human rights in our next lecture. So with this we are going to conclude, and we will be discussing this threat to human rights in our next lecture. Thank you very much.